Hello, welcome. This could be the shortest but one of the most important module in this particular course. We are going to learn about the before and after effects for elements in Oxygen Builder and also the anchor link, or in other words, hash link for Oxygen Page Builder too. Now, I'm going to show you the two instances of what I just said now, so you understand what we are actually trying to achieve at the end of this particular module. So the before and after effect is actually what is activated as soon as a cursor hovers over an element. So as you can see, when we hover over these elements, you see that we find the name appear. The names appear as soon as we hover over this element. Now, the before is when the mouse is not hovered on the element, and after is when the mouse hovers on it. I hope you understand that. So now we establish that before is when a cursor is not hovered on an element, and after is when a cursor is hovered on an element. Let's get to understand some basic instances which you and I will be very used to. So the button is one of the basic elements that actually uses the before and after effect so frequently. Now, the essence of this before and after is to make it easier for visitors to understand that this element is element that is actually clickable. Because if there is no ripple effect after a cursor is being hovered on an element, users automatically understand or practically understand that that particular element don't deserve to be clicked. Just for instance, when I hover over this, when there is no interactivity, when there is no a kind of communication between the element and my cursor, I understand basically that that particular element don't deserve to be clicked. Now, when it's a totally different thing when it happens here. When you hover over an element and it changes color, or it changes the text color, or it changes in size, or it changes in the shape, or it scales, or it zooms out, or it pops up, or it ripples and all of that, you understand that that particular button, users understand that that particular element is actually a button or a link. It happens on hash links, it happens on buttons, it happens on text link, and so on and so forth. So as you can see in this before and after, when you hover on this element, the base color becomes this is the navy, this is the royal blue, and the drop down color, well, I'll call this the stroke color, becomes the sky blue. So when there is no element, mouse, no cursor hovered on this particular button, it stays simple. The sky blue color becomes the base color, and the shadow becomes the royal blue color. But when you hover over it, the royal blue color takes place, and the base becomes the royal blue, and the shadow becomes the sky blue. This is another instance to make it easier for users to understand and still keeping the button on brand. Because if we automatically switch this button color to a different particular color, it becomes a problem for users to actually understand what is going on in the platform. And also, as you can notice, the button text color is black before the cursor is being hovered. But when we hover on it now, it changes to white. That is the effect of before and after. Let's see if there are other instances. This is a before and after. You see the ripple effect. When you hover over it, it zooms out. Let's check for more instances. This is a before and after on a div. When you hover on the div, it zooms out a little and changes the color. And the stroke color turns to, this is orange color, and the main color darkens the orange color. But when we pulls out, it is dark blue inside, and the stroke color is the navy blue, or is the royal blue, I mean. Okay, so when we scroll down, we see this other effect. When we hover over this particular div that have all these elements inside of it, we see it zooms out. When we hover out, it zooms in. Okay, so before is still at the stable, and after is zoom out. So this is basically what before and after means. So now the next thing I want to show us is the anchor link, or the hash links. When a button that leads to a particular section in a website is clicked, it is the anchor link that helps it locate that particular section. So it's not like you are going to a different page. You are in the same page, but you want to you want a button to lead somebody directly to a particular section in that particular page, you use what we call the anchor link or the hash link. For instance, we click on book a call. See how it will zoom, it will pull this particular website down to the footer. We are now in the footer. We can go back up again and we click on it again. It pulls us. This doesn't require any internet connection. That's it doesn't load to a new website. It's still your same website, but it pulls down to a specific section. You can control this particular anchor link and tell it to actually stop at this particular angle. Okay. For instance, if we say see all projects, click on it, it pulls down and stays here. I hope you get the point. So that is what an anchor link is. An anchor link is not a base link. It's a link that goes with a hash sign before the name of the link. I'm going to talk about that in a little while after we are done with this particular module. So let's get in and start our basic module. We are going to use 3 elements or four elements to actually do practice. There are more elements you can try out, but I'm not trying to show you how to use the effects on different elements. I'm trying to show you how to use this effect on any elements. These two different things. Showing you to use it on different elements means I have to test it on all elements, which doesn't make any sense because you are going to actually rely on the creativity I actually imposed through this tutorial. But I don't want to do that. I want it to be a system where I teach you how to use this particular element and you try it out yourself on different elements as you can find in the element area. So for now, we are going to be using the div to test this out. We are going to using the text to test this out. We're going to using the button and we're going to use the image to test this out. All these 4 elements, we are going to try it out. As usual, we are supposed to create a new section, but I've already created one. But let me delete this so that we can start afresh, okay? So to create a new section, you already know that. Just click on the section and it pulls in. Go into advanced, go to size and spacing. Make sure you go to height, select that and click on VH. VH means view height, VW means view width. View width means the width you want it to accommodate between each of these particular device. If it is a laptop, if you want it to be 100%, it means it's starting from the beginning to the end. If you want it to be 100% VH, it means it's starting from the top of that particular breakpoint, which is this edge, to the bottom part of that particular breakpoint, which means after that breakpoint, you are going to see another section like as we are seeing here. Okay, so we are going to make it 100% VH. Now, why I am taking time to do all these things again so that you guys will get used to it. Now, after you're done with that, that is not all you need to do. You can get back to primary. Make sure you center all elements. Okay, once you're done with that, we can now import a new div inside, which is the one in the middle. Go into advanced, go to size and spacing. The width, remember, we're going to make it VW. We are going to make this 100%. The height, we are going to make this VH. We are going to do it 100%. Now, it's not in every section you're doing this, okay? Some section, when you start building, this is usually for hero section. When you start building another section, I will teach you guys, I will show you guys what you need to do in all those other parts. Because VH and VW, they have some limitations, which we are still going to treat in the future part of this particular course. So, since we actually have this at 100% VH and 100% VW, we need to style and tell elements that is inside it how they are going to be positioned. So we want elements to be middled and centered, so that anything we are styling will be in the center. But let's first of all drag in a div so that we can be seeing what we are doing. This div, we are going to set the color in the background. Go to advanced, go to background. This is where you set color. We can set it to red, okay? So now we get back to the div guiding this particular div, not this div now. We select the div guiding this div. If you can't find it to select, you can click on the structure panel. It will open this layout. As you can see, this is the div layout, okay? And this is the div guiding it. And this is the first section we created, okay? So you click on this, you have selected the section that's guiding everything. And we click on this div, we are selecting a section that div that we dropped before this one that is inside, okay? So now, that div that we dropped for that one, we are going to center the elements, which is going to pull this particular div in the center, and we are going to click on middles, which is going to put it in the middle. I hope you get the structure and how it works. You can close this down if you are done with it. So now we have that element in the middle. This is actually the div, and we have actually controlled this element. We talked about alignment in our previous course, so this shouldn't be a difficult thing for you to do. You know how these things are running around and why they're behaving like this. You already know. The flex box, okay? So now we have the element there. We want to add another element. But if you select on this div and try to add an element like the button, it's going to add it inside that div. And that is not what we want. So to add a button outside the div, select outside the div. Okay? Then you click and add the button element. It's going to be under it, no problem. You can select the outside div now and add a gap. We talked about gap. I hope you still remember. So gap will separate all of them from each other. So we still select on div outside, and we going to add, what are we going to add this time around? Okay, we are going to add the image element. So now we added the image element. The size is too much. We can reduce the size from here by giving it 300 width. Okay, it's in full width, no problem with that. So we can change our image. We want to switch an image so that it is easier for us to understand what is going on. Let's select this image. So we now have a div. Let's still reduce. I think the size is still okay, but let's just make this 200. Fine. So we now have a div, a button, and an image. We want something else. We want, let's add a text. Okay, just a basic text. And we're going to call these Kata Studios. And basically sizing, not there. We are going to go to advanced typography. This is where I change the style of text. We are going to come to this when we get to typography. The size of the text, we want to make this 20. The thickness of the text, we want to make this 500. Okay, 500 is okay. And that is good for what I want it to be. So we now have these 4 elements to play around with. Okay, we have the div, we have the button, we have the image, and we have the text elements. So we want to play around with the before and after with all these elements. I think the button should be the first one that we are actually working with. So now selecting on the button, we can start up. As you can see, it doesn't have any effects and it doesn't even feel like a button. Let's first of all change this to click here. Okay, now we can practically select the size of the button. From here, we can say, okay, we want to increase the size of the button. Remember, if you're increasing the typography of a button, that's the text size of a button is also affecting the button itself. I hope you get what happened there. Very good. The font width, we can make it 300, so it won't be too bogus. Fine. So now we have this button. We want to start styling it. But for buttons, there are 2 ways to actually style buttons. One of which is you can do that from this particular angle. By selecting a button, this is the button color, and this is the hover color. This is the before and after I'm talking about. This hover, they call it hover, so it will be easy for you to understand. But the real statement or the real word is before and after. So hover, we can select on hover and tell the button to become red color when we hover. So when we hover on it, it becomes red color. I hope you get the point. So that's the point I'm trying to prove. I think the course we are done. No, not yet. So now we don't want to actually use that particular formula. We want to use a totally different formula, a formula that can give us granular control and make it easier for us to actually control this button the way we want it to feel. And that is the state effect. Okay, the state button here will enable us to control this button the way we want it to be. So whenever you want to add a before and after to any element, not only button, you can do that from the state button. Remember, we talked about the classes. You can do that for classes and apply that class to other elements, and that particular effect will transition or will be transferred to those particular other elements. But for now, we are not styling more than one button. Remember, as I talked about in the previous class, you can only do that when you are dealing with multiple elements of the same style, like as we have from here. But for now, we are only dealing with just singular elements like the button as we have. So now the state effect is what we are going to use to style this button the way we want it to be. So now the normal color of this button is blue. We can practically go over here to button color and say, okay, the color of this button we want is orange color. Should we use orange or let's use purple? Okay, fine. We have purple color as the base color. Now, after color is now when we need to go into the states, which means when we hover on this button, what color do we want it to be? Click on state and you will see these particular options. You see after, before, hover, original. We are going to use what? The hover. For now, this before and after is the pseudo classes. We are going to talk about this in the future class. Okay, you can add your own states here. It's still a pseudo class. So we're going to use the hover. When we select on hover, you see that options here changes. Options here changes. So now any style we are putting on here is now telling this button what is going to be when it is hovered on. But when we select the button color and set it to be orange color, the color changes, and when we hover, nothing happens. No, something happened. What happened is that this particular button, we need to get back here and click on it and click on original, which is the main state of this particular button. Then now we hover on it, you see the effect. That is before and after. Now, before and after doesn't only apply to color, it applies to everything as long as you're using Oxygen Builder. We can say, okay, what is the size of this button when we hover over it? We say we want the size to decrease like so. Okay, now when we get back to original, it increases. When we hover over it, it decreases. You see what happens there? But one thing you can note very clearly here is that the effect is too harsh. As you can see, when we hover on it, it's like it drops so fast, and we don't want that. So to slow that speed down, we need to go over to effects. That's why we talk about the before and after effect. Now we go to advanced. To do that, we get to advanced, then we will go down to effects. Click on effects, and these are all bunch of effects that are available for us to utilize. Okay, I'm going to talk about all these effects one after the other when we are done with everything. Now, one of the effects I want us to use is the transitioning effect. Transitioning effect is not an effect that shows color or size or whatever. Transition tells all of the style, how fast or slow they should flow. So now when we get to the transition, we increase this transition to about 0.8. When we hover over this now, it's not going to be very shocking. You see what happens? You see the magic? Let me zoom closely so you see. You see what happens? You see the magic? It's no more harsh anymore. When we remove this, watch what happens. Very fast, very fast, very fast, very fast. When we add 1 point, see how slow this transitions. Now, this transition affected only the button because we allow the button size to actually adjust on hover. So whenever you don't want a particular style to happen again, you can come over to the hover and hit this X button. When we hit this X button, we are practically, then you click OK. We are practically clearing all effects on that particular hover. Okay? So when we click on the hover again, we can now go to button color and tell the button color to be the same, or we'll change it to something else. Okay? Fine. And the text color, we can say, okay, since the color of the element, let me take, for instance, we are changing this color to white. Okay? Now, the text won't make sense there anymore. So we have to switch this text color to something darker or black or whatever. Okay? So that is simply it. Go to hover, click original, and hover over it. Text color changes to black, text color white, background color light green, background color dark purple. This applies to everything. Now, opacity is the level of visibility you want for that particular element. Okay? If you reduce opacity, you see what happens. You see it? Now, we can still apply opacity to the before and after. We can go to state and say what? Hover. And when we click on hover, we go to opacity and we say what? Opacity, we want it to reduce very, very much. Opacity of everything. So now when we click on the original and we hover, opacity reduce. When it switches to the main color, it reduces the opacity automatically. So you just play around with what you feel you want. Okay? We are going to clear that out again. Now, another effect, we have talked about the animation on scroll, opacity, transition. The transition, we have talked about transition. Transition, I didn't talk about something here. This is the transition, as we talked about. The button on hover, you don't apply transition on hover. You apply transition on the original states. Okay? Transition is not an after or before effect. It's an effect on its own. It doesn't matter whether it's after or before. It can be when the page loads, transition will entrance will happen. Okay, so transition is you will do transition on the main state, on the original state. Don't do it on hover. Okay, if you do it on hover, you're going to encounter a problem of when you hover, the transition is going to wait until the hover removes before it actually happens, which is kind of reverse. So now we are done with that particular effect of transition. We are going to get into the box shadow. The box shadow, we can select. This is just a basic step. We are going to do all this when we start designing proper. Okay, I just want to show you guys basic things you need to know about these effects. So the box shadow, we can select this particular color. We say box shadow horizontal offset, which is the offset left and right. Offset means the space you want it to create, or the padding you want it to create by itself, left or right. Okay, so that is what offset means. If you want to give it an offset to start from the left side, you see the offset have ended here. We don't have any extra offset. What you need to do is to add a minus sign. So you can say minus 11 and to give it an offset to the left. I hope you get the point now. So you can't drag it anymore from that point. Now we can say shadow vertical offset. You know what this one means. I don't need to tell you. I don't need to tell you much about this one. You can give it the shadow vertical, you can still give it 11, so it can be the same thing with left and right. You get the point? So this is what the button is currently. Now, this is how to apply this effect and make it look a little bit subtle. We can select on the state and tell it on a hover. On a hover, we select on the color we want to appear, which is the color of the base, the main color of the main button. Remember, this is a hover now. That's why it's showing like this. But we want to show the main color of the hover. Now we are going to give it a minus 11 here, and we give it a plus 11 here. Okay, so this is what is going to happen when we hover. So when we go to here and say original, when we hover over it, you see that the button appears. You see how subtle that is? Let me zoom closely so you can see how beautiful it is. Okay, so this is what a before and after effect for what? For the shadow. You can use it for the shadow. You can actually blur out the shadow. Let's go to state and go to hover effect. We can say the shadow blur. We increase the intensity of the blur. You get the point, what is going on there. It best all up to. The spread is how much you want it to go, how wide you want that particular blur. Blur works perfectly with, spread work perfectly with blur. So that is all you need to know about the shadow. If you want to insert it, inserting a shadow means you want the shadow to flow from the inside of that particular element. So inserting a shadow means you want it to what? Be from the inside, not from the outside, which doesn't make any sense to me. But in most cases, it might make sense to you. So we are done with that. We get to effect again. We are done with all of this. Then we take the text shadow. This is the shadow you want the text to actually have. We don't need that. The filter. We can add filter here. We can say blur. Okay, on hover, we want it to blur whenever someone hovers, but we can still do that with the blur effect with this thing. Doesn't make much sense too. The transition, we can add a transform. I'm going to have a totally different course about transform, or whenever we are dealing with this specifically, I will teach you guys about transform. But for now, let's add a transform. What do we want to happen when we hover over this? What kind of transform we want? We want it to rotate? Yes. We want it to rotate to what degree? We can now give it a degree. Let's say we want it to be rotate 60 degrees. Okay? Now, when we say original, it is normal. When we hover over it, it rotates 60 degrees. I hope you get that point too. Okay? So we can also tell it to translate. We can tell it to rotate. We can tell it to skew. We can tell it to rotate X and Y is left and right. We can tell it the perspective. You can tell it to rotate 3D. We can tell it to scale. Scale is my most prioritized because in most cases you can tell it to scale X. We tell it to scale X1 on hover and Y1. Why you wanted to make it X, Y, and Y1 is this. Let me close down on this. Let me close down on Y and leave only X. So when we go to original, when we hover over this, you're not even going to see the effect. You're not going to see the effect. Let's make this scale on 2. Fine. Or let's make this 1.1. You get the point. If you make it 2, that's too much. 1.1 is okay. We can see the effect. But if we make it 2, look at what happens if we don't give it an effect Y and X. An effect X means what? Horizontal. An effect Y means vertical. So whatever size you are going to give it on X, you are going to give the same size on Y, which is what? Proportional and consistency. So we're going to give it 2 here also. You see everything now is okay. But that's not what we are going to do. We are going to do 1.1, and here we are going to do 1.1. Fine. So when we go over to the normal states, which is the original, is this. When we go over to this, the button increases and drops down that element. See the effect? I love that effect over there. See how sweet that looks. Very sweet and subtle. Fine. So you guys are going to create something like this. I'm going to come to that in the later part of this in our assignment. So now we are going to do this with the div. We have the div here, we can say after effect, hover effect, we are not going to use the advanced anymore. We can practically go to sizing and say the padding of the div, we want it to be 22 all around. But we can't apply 22 when we don't have an element inside of it. I hope you get the point. So what we can do is telling it the width on VW, we can tell it to have a width of 55. Okay? So let's take original. When we hover over it, you see it has that effect. Now, we want this to take slowly to happen. What we do, you already guessed that. We go into effect and we go to transitioning. And in transition, we can increase the effect speed. Now, this didn't take effect. Okay? Why it didn't take effect is because it is not on every element you apply transitioning to. Okay, not on every element. You can do that practically to this particular element. You can do that to the image element in most cases, but not in elements like the div, because the div is not actually an element. The div is actually a container. You can't do that to the container. And I thank God that we actually experience this so that you don't fall into the issues and have the question of why is this not happening. So good. So now we have our effect from there. You know what you can do with the div. You can change the color on the state. We can decide. Let's go back and remove that. That looks so weird. We are going back to the div, and on the state after, we are going to go to states and we are going to clear off this and apply to all. Width, clear off. So now the color of the div, you can actually change the color of the div. So we can go to the hover state and we go to background color. We say the background color now is going to be this color. So which means whenever we hover on the div, it's going to change in color. One thing again we can do on hover, remember we are still on the hover state in the ID. One thing again we can do on the hover is the edges. We want it to be rounded. Okay, we want the border edges to be rounded. Click on the border, and inside of the border, we can do that from the border radius. Come here, set a border radius of 30. You see it curves that particular edge. You can make it 20. I love 20. Okay. Now, if we don't want this to apply to all edges of this div, what we can do is to click on this tiny button under this particular form field. Click on it. It will bring out this particular option, giving us opportunity to what? Control the condition left, control the condition right, control the condition whatever we want it to be. Okay, we can say this edges to be pointed and this edges to be curved, but that doesn't make sense. We edit all of them at once. Now we have tried to edit now. It's not going to work because we have already conditioned some stuffs from here. So to remove that, remember it's ID we are editing with, so you can't do some things if you have actually activated with ID. So you have to go back here, and whatever style you give here will automatically apply. So we're giving it 22. Around that. So now when we get over to our original state, it is this color and it is this particular curve, sharp edges. When we hover over it, it curves and changes color. You see it? Then when we want to increase the speed it takes to do that, you know where to go to, and you know some other effects you can actually mix and match to get what you want from here. For instance, you can go to the shadow and we can tell this to actually pull out a red on hover. We are actually telling it to become a red already. So on hover, we can actually tell it to pull out a red. Okay. On the shadow offset, we can give it, we are giving it an inset. Okay. It's an inset. So remove that inset, make sure it is off. And we can give this one like so. Okay. Fine. So when we go to the normal state, it is like this. When we hover over it, it pulls out and shows that particular second border. So we are done with this. This is basically things you need to know about this. You can actually give a padding on hover, which is not necessary. You can also give a stroke to a particular div. So we select on that div, go to border radius, we go to current editing. Okay, click on what? All borders. All borders means we want this stroke to apply to all borders. What is the color of the stroke we want to give it? We want to give it a color of blue. Okay, so we select the blue, it applies. Then here we tell it how many widths, what is the thickness of the stroke. We give it a 2 thickness. Now we need to actually enable this option called the solid. Solid makes it to what? Apply. This effect is actually applying, but if we don't enable this solid effect, it won't show the effect we just created. The solid tells it to what? Show a solid edge around that particular stroke. Let's just make this a 5. Then a dashed, want it to be dashed. You know what dash means? A dotted makes it circle, circle, circle around, but we want just a solid. So you can switch your color from here to whatever color you want. Okay, you can also do this on a state. It's not on a state now, it's on an original. Okay, which means when we hover over this, it changes and pulls out those particular effects. So this is what it is for the, I don't like this color. This color is too harsh. So we are going to go back to the border, and all we need to do from here is we can say all around. We don't want to give it any border, we'll call it none. None, we give it no color. So let's get into the image. So when we select on the image element, we can actually do some little tweak. One, we can reduce the opacity. We have talked about the opacity. From here, effect, we can go to opacity, and on the after, or we call it hover, we can tell it to reduce opacity, which is the visibility of that particular element. Okay, this is necessary in most cases on header, on the header, in case for your logo you want people to you want it to be clickable. So when someone hover on it, the image can reduce on the intensity a little, like so. Okay, it shouldn't be that much, just a little is okay. One other effect you can give to an image is to scale it. You can do that from the effect also. You can get that particular one in transition, add a transform. You can add a scale. Okay, we have talked about the scale where we talked about you giving it a 1.1 and giving this one a 1.1. So there are more things you can do on the image, like skewing and all of that. Those are still the same effects. You can still apply it in the image. So we go to the original, it's still the state. When we hover on it, it's actually reduce the intensity. It is too harsh. We can get back to effect, transitioning, and we increase the transition intensity. Very good. So this also happens on the image element. So the text element, we can convert this to a link if we want to. All you need to do is just right click on it and click on wrap with link. Wrap with link automatically converts that. As you can see, the text color changes to a link text color, which means this is clickable now. That's why you see the mouse icon hand. As you can see, this is not clickable. This is not a link. Until you click option and wrap it with a link, it will just be the mouse. As you can see, the mouse cursor is just the mouse cursor. It's not a finger like this. A finger means that it is actually a link or clickable. So we click on wrap with link. It is now a link. We can now add a link from this particular part. Add the link we want to link. When we come to that, we are going to deal with it. So for this one, we have the color to be so on normal state. On normal state, we can change the color to be this dark purple. On a hover state, we can say on a hover state, you change the text color to be this particular blue. Okay? And on a hover state, we can come here and tell it to have an underline. Go to typography, and we can go to text decoration. We give it an underline. Where is that underline? Fine. We find it here. Okay? So we have an underline from there. So when we go to the normal state, everything stays the same. And when we hover over it, we have a text with an underline. So now we have a text with an underline on hover, and you know what to do to make it more, the effect more subtle. Go to transition, and you increase the intensity. When you hover, it takes easy before it transitions in. Okay, this particular text, you can actually tell it to have a background on the state. On hover, advanced, we can go to background, and we say the background color we want for this text will be, let's make it a white, let's make it a black. Okay, then here we need to give it a padding. Let's go into size and spacing, padding and margin. Let's give it a 30 pixel all around. Let's give it a 20 pixel all around. Okay, apply to all. Then we have to give it a 40 pixel left and right, because those ones are supposed to be wider. Okay, so this is it. So now when we go to the original state, the text is nothing. When we hover over it, it becomes a button. So it's all up to you what you want to do. There are many things you can do with the before and after. I'm just showing you a few of them. As you can see, I show you some example from the other place where we actually give a little bit of briefing or a little bit of guide. So that is basically it about the before and after effects in Oxygen Builder. In summary, we actually did this on 3 elements as we talked about. We did this on a button, we did this on a div, we did this on an image, and we did it on a text. On a button, we made sure we changed the text color on hover, and we changed the button color on hover, and we changed the button shadow on hover. You get the point. On the div, we make sure we change the color on the normal state before. On after, we change the color and also change the border radius, and also added a box shadow. On the image, we reduced the opacity, making it more fainted so people understand that this is actually clickable, and also increase the size of the image a little with the effect called scaling. On the text element, we converted it to become a link, which means we actually make the text to become a button. So after we converted this to a link, we made sure that on the after, the color changes and it have a stroke under it, and it have a background with a pattern of 40 left and right and 20 top and bottom. So that's basically it about the before and after. I'll meet you in the next course, which is the anchor link.